Good afternoon, Council and staff. May I have a mover and seconder to call the meeting to order? Councillors Fisher and Garwood, that the special meeting of the Council of the Township of Springwater of September 6, 2023 come to order at 4 p.m. All those in favor? And that has carried. Councillor, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? And seeing none, I will now call upon planners Lisk and Belcourt to make a presentation regarding shipping containers zoning bylaw amendment ZB 2023-015. May I have a mover and seconder to oh no, wait until after. Please begin.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. You're good? Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor Coughlin, Deputy Mayor Cabral, and all members of council. My name is Deborah Lisk. I'm a planner here at the Township. I just returned from maternity leave back in May, so I am a new face for some of you, so it's nice to meet you. Me and my colleague, Brianna Belcourt, are going to do a short presentation on shipping containers. We're calling this an educational session, so we want to have some open dialogue, and feel free to ask questions throughout the slides, and we will wait till the end and open up for questions and answers. So just as a brief overview, we're going to talk about the background and the existing situation today, what's happening with shipping containers. And then we're going to briefly talk about analysis in the research that we conducted on various municipalities that helped us draft our policies that were provided to you as part of the information report today. Again, those are draft policies. We hope to bring this to a public meeting in October. I think October 11th is the date. And we do have the opportunity to modify those policies today if we need to before we bring them forward to the public. Again, that will go through the public meeting process, and then we can update and finalize those before bringing them back to council for final approval. So we'll go to the next slide.
Perfect. Thank you, Council. On June 7th, you will recall that Council directed staff to report back with current regulations and potential options within the municipality for shipping containers. In response, staff presented on July 5th an options report for Council's consideration, and Council chose to move forward with a zoning bylaw amendment led by the Township to modify our shipping container policies. So currently, the existing shipping container policies is a prohibition across the board. So Section 331.1 of the Township Zoning Bylaw prohibits the use of disused rail cars or shipping containers or part thereof on a property. The exception to this would be in the general industrial outside storage zone, where outside storage is permitted. The shipping containers have been considered permitted as well. Additionally, shipping containers can be used as a building material provided the applicable building code and zoning provisions for the ultimate end use are complied with. For instance, you could construct a dwelling if you could comply with the required building code regulations out of a shipping container as a building material or component, but not a standalone structure.
So as part of our research, we conducted site visits throughout the municipality. Throughout those visits, we noted that shipping containers are used pretty much in all zones throughout the township, regardless of the township's current prohibition on shipping containers. So we saw shipping containers in residential zones, as noted in the photo above, commercial zones, industrial and agricultural zones, as well as other zones throughout the township. A few things that we made note of was that the majority of shipping containers that were visible for us driving in our car was ones that were located in the front yards. So those are the ones that seem to have more of an impact for those that are traveling and for neighbors and abutting property owners.
So in addition to the site visits that staff had conducted, staff also considered the previous discussions and themes that came up through those discussions with council, including the urban versus rural conversation. So shipping containers, as Deborah noted, can be found throughout the municipality in both urban and rural settings. However, generally, urban lots are less suitable and more impactful when they house a shipping container than more rural large lots outside of settlement areas. The second theme that was discussed was, of course, bylaw enforcement. So compliance issues related to shipping containers are dealt with on a complaint basis throughout the township currently. And enforcement issues are commonly related to the unsightly appearance of shipping containers. In our information report that is on the agenda this evening, it also details over the last 5 years approximately how many complaints or by law enforcement matters that have dealt with shipping containers. Okay. Further, there were a number of considerations that we looked at, which were outlined in the first option report that was presented back in July. So these considerations included the needs the policies would have, such as a definition would be required, where would they be permitted, what zones, what would the applicable provisions be, is there a maximum number of shipping containers that would be allowed or a maximum size? Those type of conversations need to be had, as well as the visual impact. So the zoning bylaw does not have the ability to control the color or aesthetic maintenance of a shipping container. However, we can control things such as location, including setbacks, what yard they're permitted in, those type of things to reduce the visual impact on neighboring property owners and the streetscape. We also looked at building code. So under the building code, a shipping container would be considered a building when it's no longer used for its original purpose, being the movement of goods, and once it's permanently placed on a private property. And then ventilation. So often these shipping containers are watertight to move goods. So there may be some concerns about ventilation in them, and depending on what's being stored could potentially be dangerous. And then one of the final considerations was, would development charges be applicable? Obviously, this will be dependent on the ultimate end use of that structure and need to comply with the development charges bylaw accordingly.
Okay, so as part of our research, and as noted in our options report, staff conducted a review of 10 municipalities. Of those 10 municipalities, none of them permitted shipping containers outright throughout the municipality. They had specific zones that they would be permitted in. 4 of them prohibited shipping containers, while the remaining 6 permit them in a limited form. So 3 themes of those that did permit those shipping containers. The number 1 theme was that shipping containers were considered accessory buildings. So they're required to meet the requirements of any accessory building, including compliance with the applicable zone provisions, i.e. setbacks, coverage, height, the size of those structures, and go through the appropriate approval process, building permit and zoning compliance if needed. And again, there were limited zones that these shipping containers were permitted in. Most of them were allowed in the industrial zones, some commercial zones, and on rural lands and agricultural properties, not usually permitted in the residential zones of those 10 that we reviewed. And then the other common theme in permitting these structures were allowing them for a temporary basis in the residential zones during the construction for the storage of tools and materials. So those are 3 of those things that we reviewed while providing our draft policies.
So taking into consideration the analysis that staff conducted and what other municipalities have done in the past, staff have drafted policies for consideration and discussion today. Please note, as Deb mentioned, these are working policies and there is still the opportunity to tweak them before we provide notice for the public meeting. So the number 1 thing that we did was create a new definition for shipping containers. So that definition we've kind of crafted is shipping container shall mean a structure originally designed for or capable of being mounted or moved by rail, truck, or ship by means of being mounted on a chassis or similar transport device and now utilized for accessory storage. This definition includes the term disused rail car and storage container having a similar appearance and characteristic to that of a shipping container. So moving from the definition, the second main point of the policies drafted is the zones in which they would be permitted. So based on our discussions to date, we selected the following zones. These zones are all primarily in the rural area. You may find them the odd time within a settlement area, but for the most part, they're concentrated in the rural areas. So it includes highway commercial, rural commercial, kennel, general industrial inside storage, general industrial outside storage, open space, and agricultural.
As part of the drafted policies, there's a number of regulations that we put forth for these accessory structures. One of them being that they need to be accessory to a main use on that property. So if you have a residential house in the agricultural area, so you're on a larger property, it could be an accessory to that residential use. Or if you have a commercial property, a highway commercial property, and you want an accessory shipping container, it'd have to be accessory to that main commercial use on the property. The main point of these policies, I think, is that they need to be located in the rear yard. That means that it needs to be located behind the main wall of the main building on the property. So not located in the front yard where a lot of these shipping containers today are located, or the ones that we could at least see. The other things that we've noted in our policies that just as we're considering these as accessory buildings, all other accessory building provisions in that applicable zone would apply. So that talks about setbacks, so where these structures can be placed on the property, the height of these structures, lot coverage, and the size of these structures. So we're not creating new accessory provisions for these structures. They are going to go align with our already approved accessory provisions for our structures. Another key one with that, it needs to continue to be secondary and subordinate to that main use. So we don't want shipping containers to be the main use of that property. They still need to be accessory and smaller to the main use on that lot. A few other things to take into consideration is they cannot be used for human habitation. So if someone wants to use shipping containers as a building material to create a house, they can do that. But again, it cannot look like a shipping container. It has to go through that the building code provisions for dealing with that. An accessory storage structure cannot be used as human habitation.
Okay, so as for the next steps, so as I mentioned, notice of public meeting would be sent out later this month, as we've scheduled a statutory public meeting date of October 11th for the zoning bylaw amendment. Dependent on the discussions had around the public meeting and the outcomes of that, staff would hope to bring a recommendation report and bylaw for council's consideration in November of this year. Again, dependent on council's decision related to that bylaw, and should they choose to pass a new bylaw, the policies would then be in effect following the statutory appeal period in December 2023 or thereabouts. At that time, enforcement would then be resumed based on those revised policies and as needed.
I think that's it, right?
Yep.
So that concludes our presentation for today. I'd like to open up for any questions and comments on those draft policies or anything we talked about. And again, like Brian mentioned, we do have the scheduled public meeting on October 11th, so there is an opportunity to discuss these once it goes to the public.
Thank you very much, Council. At this time, we can open up for any questions or comments. Councillor Alexander and then Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. So just a quick question, and this is just my ignorance of the different zoning. So what exactly is considered open space? If you're allowed in an open space, but it has to be an accessory building. I was a bit confused with that.
Yep.
Planner Lisk.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Open space is usually a zone that you would find, I guess, the area behind this property is open space, correct? Yeah, so usually public uses, parks, any other permitted uses?
Yeah. So just to add to what Planner Lisk is saying, the open space zone is normally used for public use type facilities such as parks or administration centers of this nature. So in order for it to be accessory, it would have to be accessory to the use on that property. So the township couldn't just store, I'll make something up, bikes on a property that it doesn't make sense to use bikes on. It's not accessory to a recreation facility or that type of thing. So that kind of thing, it'd have to be directly accessory to that use. So if there's a park and it's a splash pad and you're storing equipment associated with the splash pad, that may be permitted.
Follow on?
So just a comment in general, my worry with that would be, especially if it's township property and it's a park or such, given that these are airtight storage units, if somehow a child or somebody wandered in and got trapped, like I think that could be potentially dangerous in that situation. That's just a comment in general.
Thank you. And I might defer to CBO Stratton for that. I did have a meeting with many individuals over the last little while here, and just learning about the different steps that can be taken to ensure that there is access from the interior, so whether it's a man door, and I'll let CBO Stratton elaborate.
Through you, Mayor Coughlin. Through you, Mayor Coughlin. Yeah, so part of the provision, we would want to have ventilation in, especially if they're storing any kind of flammable liquids. There's been issues in the past where these have exploded and actually killed firefighters. So part of it was we would definitely like to see some ventilation. So I have, if this goes through, I've developed a declaration form. So part of that will be requiring ventilation in them if they're going to be storing any flammable. They're not necessarily, even though they're fairly airtight, they're not like 100% airtight. I don't think I'd be worried about somebody locking themselves in there for a short period of time, but as far as storing something flammable, that would be another story.
Thank you, and I'll move to Councillor Thompson.
Through your research, could you estimate how many we have, even though they're not allowed in our township, how many we have in our township at this time? And what category would rural residential fall into? So for example, someone that has a home outside one of the settlement areas.
Sure. Planner Belcourt.
Thank you, Councillor, or Mayor Coughlin, through you to Councillor Thompson. It'd be difficult to estimate exactly how many. You could take a 5-minute drive and count a handful, I'm sure, in any direction. I would say there's hundreds of them throughout the municipality. We definitely saw probably 100 on our site visits alone. And yeah, with that said, we haven't considered rural residential as a permitted zone. We did kind of go back and forth on that. The reason being that a lot of our municipality outside of settlement areas is zoned agricultural, and that includes a lot of like one-off properties in the agricultural areas that were formerly severed from larger lots. And then we do have the rural clusters. So the rural residential zoning is usually on those rural clusters where they're a bit more compact in design, the lots again, although located outside of settlement areas. For instance, Hillview Crescent, if you're familiar with it, it's off of Gill Road. That's a rural residential zoned area. There's quite a few houses there. They're just not within a settlement area. So that's primarily why, because we believe there will be larger impact on the neighbors. But if that's something council did want to consider, we could definitely look at adding that to the draft policies.
Follow on, Councillor Thompson.
So that was something that I would like to see be considered, first of all. And secondly, with regards to the ventilation. So I think it's easy to say we have hundreds of these in our community already with no regulations and no ventilation. So I think we have to do something for that alone, you know, just to make sure that there are regulations. If we do go forward with this, I think it's going to make it much safer for our community.
Deputy Cabral.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. With respect to the rural area, I think maybe there should be something in there to address maybe what Councillor Thompson is referencing. I would suggest maybe when you look at places like Hillview, it is Hillview.
Yeah.
Those types of little clusters, even off of Gill Road, Gallagher and all that, that maybe there should be something put in place as far as the actual lot size is concerned. Because you do have these clusters where they have basically residential sized lots, but they just don't happen to be in a settlement area. And I think that might be something that might address that concern, because Some folks who live in there do have substantial lots, and a lot of them are wooded lots too, that really, they could tuck away a sea can in there and utilize it without really affecting any of their neighbors. So I guess, I don't know if there's a way to include something along those lines to maybe address that concern, as well as provide opportunity for folks that can actually make use of these things. The other one I had is in respect of, I was going to talk about setbacks, but two. One of them, and I thank Director Spagno for partially answering it, was with respect to folks that are moving and they put sea cans in there to load them up. Sometimes they sit there for weeks on end, maybe even months on end. And there was something about making special arrangements with township. I would prefer to see maybe something where there's a permit application process in place and that it actually fits right into the official plan in that respect, so that everybody knows exactly what the playing field is like. They have a certain window of opportunity, they pay for the permit, kind of like a road allowance or a road occupancy permit, something along those lines. And the last one is 10 by 10 square foot sea cans. Which really, I don't know if that would fit that. How are we going to deal with them, because they really don't fit into the building structure aspect as I understand it?
I'll defer to CDO Verstraeten for that.
To you, Mayor Coughlin, to Deputy Mayor Cabral. So yes, in a residential zone for an accessory structure, anything under 15 meters squared used as an accessory building would be exempt from the requirements of a building permit. So somebody could put a, say, 8 by 20 in a residential zone without getting a building permit. So we could capture this, say, if we wanted, like for temporary, for maybe even a permit through bylaw, or we could develop something through building, but it specifically wouldn't require a building permit. So I couldn't issue a building permit for it.
Thank you. Before we do continue the conversation, I'm just gonna have a mover and seconder so that if there are changes, we can get those on the floor as well. So if I can have a mover and seconder to receive the presentation regarding shipping containers. I have Councillor Moore and Thompson. That the report from planners regarding shipping containers zoning bylaw amendment ZB 2023-015 dated September 6, 2023 be received. And at this time, we can have any further questions or comments. I do have a question about the rear setback of a building, and understanding that typically when there's septics and whatnot, is there, in your research, was there opportunity to have it just not visible? So if someone was to build a fence, or if they were to hide it behind a hedge, or if it wasn't impacting their neighbors or their community, is there an opportunity whereby if having it in the front, if it's, you know, I'm picturing someone who owns a garage, if you put it around the back, it doesn't become as easily accessible. Was there any consideration given to that?
I can go if you want, if you're okay with it. Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. I think that definitely was considered throughout it, and the general, I think, consensus when we discussed it internally was that if we have it in the rear yard, there's a greater buffer to the other land uses and the streetscape. Obviously, with the understanding that there could be situations where it could be buffered in the front yard, there would always be opportunity for a minor variance with having it built into the zoning bylaw. So we could look at things on a site-specific basis. While still protecting and hopefully encouraging people to locate them in the rear yard. With that said, sometimes it gets tricky on regulating the buffering or the landscaping or the maintenance of those things in the future as they move forward under the zoning bylaw, but definitely something that could be considered on a site-specific basis. Do you have anything to add?
No, that's
Okay, I did have Councillors Thompson and then Deputy Cabral.
So if this goes forward, would we, as a township, create a plan to have all of these hundreds of sea containers become compliant? And how would this affect bylaw?
MELO Kellington is now leaving the room. I didn't know, did you want to comment on that?
Through you, Mayor Coughlin, to Councillor Thompson. It would be something that we could definitely take a look at, moving forward if this does go through, kind of what our next approach would be, if we're still going to work on just a complaint basis, or if we're going to take inventory around the township. That would be completely up to council to make that decision. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I was going to go to, is this a follow-on? I was going to go to Cabral and then back. Thank you. Deputy Cabral?
Thank you. Just a couple of things coming to mind as the discussion goes forward. Thank you very much, Councillor Alexander. Actually, this one through Mayor Coughlin to Chief Building Inspector Verstraeten. I have seen situations where folks have bought, say, a 20-foot sea can and basically dressed it up so that it literally looks just like a shed. So it's really just the facade on the outside, but structurally it's a sea can. And then we're looking now at the building aspect. Would that qualify then for a building permit for someone to put into a residential area if it was designed and built in such a manner? Because most of the complaints tend to be on the unsightliness of these things.
Through you, Mayor Coughlin, to Deputy Mayor Cabral, it still wouldn't change as long as they stayed within the minimum requirements. If they're less than 15 meters squared and an accessory structure, they would still be exempt even if you put siding or roof on, provided that they could stay under that measurement.
Right.
So when you go with an 8x20, if you start adding strapping, siding and stuff, or any kind of overhangs, then now you'll get into a building permit.
Okay, thank you.
That's the way we currently do it. We allow them as a component to a building. So right now you would be required to put a roof and siding on it, so it's not unsightly. So we do have a permit process for that in place right now, but say if somebody stayed under that 15 meters squared, they would be exempt.
Councillor Thompson? Oh, sorry, Planner Lisk and then Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. Just to add, regardless if the building code requires a building permit for these structures, if we put forth these draft policies, any structure as a shipping container would need to comply with the zoning bylaw.
Then back to Deputy Cabral with your mic.
So I just want clarification on that because what I'm hearing is two different things. One is that it's considered a building material if it's used for building purpose. So if somebody takes a sea can and wants to build an accessory structure in their backyard that they would normally qualify and be able to do, and they dress it up as such, wouldn't they still be able to do that? That's the piece I'm asking. Even though we're saying sea cans will only be permitted here, we are looking at raw sea cans in their original form. So someone takes one and uses it and puts windows on it, turns it into a nice shed, covers it all up, comes and gets a building permit, and they're legally entitled, let's say, to build a structure that size in a residential area, they would be able to do so then. So that would be my thought. And if I just might touch real quick on Councillor Thompson's as far as are we going to go out and take them. I kind of see this as an opportunity to bring a lot of the sea cans into compliance, not the other way around. We're going to go out and start moving a lot of them away. I think the ones that cause issues are the ones that are probably in the wrong spot to begin with. So that kind of makes me feel a little bit better that we're not going to go out there and start pulling 200 sea cans out of different locations. So that, just my thoughts on it.
Yeah.
CBO Verstraeten?
Through you, Mayor Coughlin, to Deputy Mayor Cabral. So somebody could build a house out of a shipping containers if they would wanted to as a component of a building. So you're starting to see more of that. We haven't seen any in Springwater yet, but it will come. So as long as they can meet the code requirements and they'll be designed under Part 4, which is engineered, somebody could build a shipping container home or shipping container factory or any. It's amazing what they're doing with shipping containers now. So say as far as that being a component of building, there's not really a lot of limitations other than what the zoning requirements would be.
Planner Belcourt?
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. Just to clarify, and so that permission to use as a building material wouldn't change with these policies. However, if they were looking to create a shed, they would have to meet the accessory building provisions regardless of the size and if a building permit's required.
Councillor Thompson?
So I would propose an amendment that we would add the category of rural residential to one of the zones for consideration.
And I just need a seconder for that amendment. Counselor Garwood. Deputy Cabral.
Just clarification on that. You're adding an amendment to include, okay, I just wanted to make sure if it was including, that sounds pretty reasonable to me. It levels the playing field. If it was to exclude, it kind of denies some people an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. So we do have a motion put forward by Counselor Thompson to have the rural residential area with a proposed, and that staff include provisions for allowance of rural agricultural zoned properties with the appropriate conditions, it's rural residential, zone properties with the appropriate conditions to minimize impacts on neighboring properties. And Deputy Cabral?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Just before we vote, Mayor Coughlin, I think that also plays into, are you suggesting rural residential? However, what about lot size? Are we taking that into consideration?
I'm going to defer to Director
Thank you.
Spagnuol.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. Through you to Deputy Mayor Cabral. The the reference to the bylaw really speaks to the building structure. So there's parameters in the zoning bylaw that establish coverage, for example. So you would have a percentage of coverage that would be devoted to a residential zone that these structures in their accumulative form would have to abide by. So the bylaw, just based on its use, already does dictate what the accessory building sizes would need to be per zone.
Thank you. So on the amendment, council, all those in favor? And that has carried. Council, are there any further questions or comments before we move on? And seeing none, we are now receiving, voting and receiving the report from the planners regarding shipping containers zoning bylaw amendment ZB 2023-015 dated September 6, 2023 be received. All those in favor? And that has carried. Thank you very much. We're just gonna wait a second before we move into closed. Deputy Cabral will be joining us right back, but we can resolve into closed while we wait. May I have a mover and seconder to enter into closed session? I have Councillor Garwood and Councillor Moore that in accordance with Section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001, the Corporation of the Township of Springwater does here resolve into closed session at 4:32 p.m. for discussions pertaining to the security of property of the municipality or local board, a proposed and pending acquisition or disposition of land for the municipality or local board, and litigation and potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board. The topic is surplus lands and OLT 220035392212 Russell Road, process update and direction. And this is to move into closed. All those in favor? And that has carried, and I will give our clerk and IT a quick second here. May I have a mover and seconder for the confirmation bylaw? Deputy Cabral, Councillor Garwood, that bylaw 20. Mover and seconder that the confidential report from the planner of Director of Planning Services regarding potential municipal land surplus lands phase 1 dated September 6, 2023 be received. I need a mover and seconder for that. Councillors Moore and Fisher. All those in favor? That has carried. And now may I have a mover and seconder for the confirmation bylaw? Deputy Cabral, Councillor Garwood, that bylaw 2023-080 to confirm and adopt the proceedings of council at the special meeting held on September 6, 2023 listed herein be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? That has carried. And a mover and seconder to adjourn. Councillors Thompson and Fisher, that the special meeting of the Township of Springwater does now adjourn at 5:43 p.m. to meet again in regular meeting on September 6, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. All those in favor? And that has carried. Thank you.